Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Teamwork a Better Way podcast after a short hiatus. I'm Christian Napier, and I'm joined by the man in a really, really nice, fancy shirt there, Spencer Horn. Spencer, how you doing?
Great, Christian. Good to talk to you again. It has been a moment, hasn't it? A minute.
It has been a minute, and you've been all over the country. So, where have your travels taken you since the last time we spoke?
A few places. I've been to Oregon. I've been to New York. Just most recently in Ohio, and so we'll talk a little bit about some of that today. And then, just trying to get one last weekend in before we start to get cold to climb a mountain. I'm just going to be traveling a bunch starting, this weekend. I'll be gone for like 2 weeks solid, and I had to climb one more mountain, Christian.
Okay, well, you got to tell us what's the mountain that you are climbing or just did climb.
I just climbed on Friday, Saturday. I took two of my sons and daughter-in-law. And we climbed Mount Nebo, and it is one of the toughest climbs. It's only 9.3 miles out and back, but it was the last two legs that you are climbing are just, I mean, 60 degrees straight up, no switchbacks, shale rock, very sharp, cliffs on both sides. If you're afraid of heights, not a great climb, but 11,928 feet. So it's the tallest mountain in the Wasatch Range, which is the mountain range that is right up against Salt Lake Valley, Provo. Pretty much, that's the mountain range that most of us live next to here, and it's a beautiful mountain range. But that's the tallest.
It is my favorite mountain.
Is that right?
Yes, ever since I was a kid, because you can see it from a long distance. If you are up, I mean, if you're at the airport in Salt Lake, you can see Mount Nebo on a clear day, and it's like 80 or 90 miles away from the airport.
Right.
And then when you're coming from the south, I mean, it is the anchor of the Wasatch Range, and that's the first mountain that you see, and so it's always been my favorite. So I've never dreamed to climb it, but I certainly enjoy driving past it, and and then behind the mountain, you've got all that Payson Lakes area and
Oh,
everything.
it's
It's
yeah,
really,
it's
really
it's
beautiful.
beautiful up there, and the view is just amazing. So you once you get up there, you can see over Utah Lake all the way into Salt Lake, and you can just see everywhere. And we saw a herd of probably 20 mountain goats, and it's fun, and it's challenging, and it's just something I love to challenge myself with. So, what about you? What's been exciting with you?
Well, on Saturday, I had an opportunity to give a presentation, actually two presentations on life stories with one of our colleagues from National Speakers Association, Kathy Lovelace, who invited me to come and speak with her about family stories. And that was awesome. It was
That's
wonderful to hear her
amazing.
stories. Yeah, it was great. And on Wednesday, so tomorrow, the day after we're airing this, I'm doing a webinar online as a kind of a follow up to that because we had a short period of time to actually get into the details of Raconto, our storytelling software. So that was a really, really fun thing that happened over the weekend, and super excited to help people capture and share their life stories.
It's interesting that we were talking about stories, that stories are so central to our culture, to our lives, to our businesses, and to our success in team performance and everything. You and I were just talking before we got on about the work you're doing with the organizing committee in France and actually capturing stories. Tell us a little bit about what you were doing.
Right. So, as part of my remit, I guess, with the International Olympic Committee, I have the great privilege to interview the various department heads and managers in the different host cities who are organizing the games. And right now, we are interviewing people in Paris as they're in the middle of their preparations for the Paris 2024 Olympic and Paralympic Games. And it's fascinating to hear the stories that they share. Uh, for better or for worse, they're not public knowledge. All of this is used internally by the IOC
And how do
to
they use it?
share. What's that?
And how do they use that internally?
So they they take all of these interviews that we do, and up through today, we have more than 1,500 of these interviews, and they make them available on a searchable online platform. So if you're a future host, say Los Angeles 2028, and you want to hear or learn what your predecessors did in Paris, in Tokyo, and in Rio, going all the way back to the 2016 games in Rio, you can actually go on and you can watch those interviews, and you can search specifically for different responses to questions. For example, if you wanted to just go look at the question where they shared three pieces of advice with future organizing committees, you could do that. So it's a tremendous resource for the future hosts to learn from their predecessors, but it is kept within the Olympic movement and is not made available to the general public.
Well, and I think one of the reasons why this is so important is just how we as humans assimilate information. We don't readily accept data. We we understand things in stories and how they relate to each other. And so getting good at storytelling is a way to connect with your constituents, with your team members to create greater engagement. It's such a powerful skill. And sometimes people struggle with that because like, well, why do I need to tell a story? Because that is what's going to create a mental connection with your audience. And your audience can be members of your family, it can be members of your team, it could be members of or people that you want to just persuade to act, to buy, to think, to do. And so
Uh, I totally agree, Spencer. And I think an important component of all of this, not that we want to go too far down this rabbit hole of storytelling here, is when we're doing this with the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, we are doing it through interviews, through video.
yeah.
And the reason for this is A, it is much faster for people to talk than it is for them to write. In fact, what we have seen is that it's on the order of 30 times faster
So are
to
you
write
telling
it
me
than
telling
it is.
stories is actually a productivity hack?
It's a humongous productivity hack.
All right
It
then.
didn't used to be necessarily because there wasn't an easy way to consume the content in video that rather than just watch it through analog, you couldn't
Right.
really search.
Right.
But now with automated transcription, the search features and tools are so advanced. It's very easy to just go to write to something that you're very interested in, a very specific topic. But if you think about this, the average person types about 40 words per minute, but that is if you are basically reading a document and typing what it says.
Right.
But if you are really thinking about composing something, if you're trying to compose a document, it takes much longer to do that. Whereas speaking, and the average English speaker speaks 150 to 180 words per minute. And the reason that it takes, among other things, that it takes so long to do it in writing versus speaking is because when we are speaking, we are using things besides words to communicate our message. We are using the tone of our own voice. We're using the velocity of it, the volume of the voice. We are using intonations. We are using our all kinds of nonverbal language like hand gestures and the way our body moves. And when we try to put this in writing and describe how we're feeling, we have to decode everything that we would normally say with our hands or with the inflection in our voices. And we have to figure out how to say that in writing. And so it just takes a long time.
Yeah.
And then
Interesting.
from the consumption standpoint, we're we've been talking to each other since we were little tiny kids. That's how we and so from a consumption standpoint, just watching somebody speak, hearing all of the inflections in their voice, seeing the body language, it's just a much richer experience than just simply writing.
And I think that's one of the reasons why podcasts are so important. I want to share a little story. I was speaking with a CEO doing a coaching session. This was she was out of California, and she was telling me just on this topic that she had just gone through a course at Stanford University on storytelling because CEOs, executives, need to be very good at telling stories. Now, why? To let me give you another example. I had several conversations with potential new clients yesterday. One of them was a company in Michigan yesterday that I talked to. They've been in business for many years, and since the pandemic, things have changed. This is a company that actually does inventory management for grocery and pharmacy and I so gosh I'm going blank, but I mean I'm just meeting them, and the turnover that they're having is extremely high since the pandemic, and there's never been a need to have culture building within their team up until now. I mean, this is a company that the owner now started working at in 1998, and he's seen an enormous shift of how workers feel about the work and the meaning and the purpose behind it. And so he started to work with a coach that I know and created mission, vision, values. And now he's got the people who are managing in the leadership role who've come from the old culture, who are not buying in to the new culture. They're just like, we just need to count stuff. We're just all about counting widgets. And yet they're struggling to retain and attract good workers because they have this old mentality. He's like, I need help to get their buy-in on these new cultural issues so that we can reduce our turnover, reduce the cost, make our lives a little bit easier, and be a great place to work. How do I get my people to buy in? You think it's going to be data? You think it's going to be a PowerPoint show? It's stories. It is, what does this mean to them? How does this make their life easier? So being able to persuade and tell those stories will have an enormous impact on the success of this organization just by being able to do that.
Well, I totally agree. And there's a story that is still being written, and we don't know the end of it. It's a story that it may have started during COVID, but COVID has really accelerated it, and it's our topic today, which is this whole work remotely, work in the office thing. That goes down to the core of culture that you're talking about here, Spencer.
Yeah.
I know that you're seeing it everywhere you go. It's on your mind. So why don't you kind of bring us into the discussion that we want to have today,
Yeah.
the remote work versus the in-person work, how
Versus
different
office.
generations may be viewing remote versus in-person.
To me, it's interesting. My question is, who's driving the return to the office? And I think a lot of people would say, well, it's obvious, it's employers, and we'll talk about that in a second. Yet, I'm getting confusing reports, and this is why I want to talk about it, because I know we've talked about remote versus hybrid work on our podcast before, but I want to talk about it at least this last time because I think it's so important. I have heard and read lots of experts, so-called experts. We've talked about people like author, oh my gosh, what's his name, who said we just got to go back to the office.
It
Daniel
was Malcolm Gladwell.
Malcolm Gladwell. That's right. Malcolm Gladwell's, we just got to go back to the office. And yet he, a little hypocritically, works remotely, right? We hear, employers are taking advantage of their flexible schedules, but they want everybody to come back to the office so they have more control. And it is true, ever since the pandemic began, the employers that I've been talking to, major organizations, HR professionals, CEOs, executives, their big question is, are my people being productive? How do we make sure that if they're not at home, they're not goofing off walking their dog? How do we make sure they're not, playing frisbee golf instead of doing what I need them to do? And right now, with potential downturn again in the economy, there is pressure to get people back to the office because like we've got to consolidate, we've got to be more productive, and employers who have been kind of punched around a bit by this quiet quitting, this great resignation, by people just leaving, are feeling like they have a little more power and authority now because some employees are nervous that they may lose their position. And so that's a little reversal that's happening. So I definitely see that there is pressure from the C-suite, from employers. But my question is, what about the generations? What about who in the office wants to go back and who wants to go remote? And experts are saying that, well, it's our age, Christian, that wants to work remotely. Why? Because we don't care about the relationships in the office. We have our families. We have other outside interests. We don't need as much mentoring and guidance, and so a lot of our generation, Gen X and older, are like, hey, heck, let's work remotely. But then I hear other people say, no, it's the Gen Z, it's the millennials, it's the younger folks. They can work from anywhere. They want to work from anywhere. Then others will say, well, it's our generation that wants to go back to the office, and then it's others that say, no, it's the Gen Z and the millennials because they need the camaraderie, they need the friendships, they need the mentoring. So my question is which is it? Who is it that wants to go to the office and who wants to work remotely in your experience?
Uh, I don't know if it's a one size fits all that all of the Gen Xers want to go back to the office and all the Gen Zers want to work remotely, or vice versa. I'm guessing that there's probably a mix in there. I know for me, I've been remote since COVID hit, and I've had a grand total of one opportunity in the Olympic space to actually work on site. Everything else has been remotely. I wouldn't mind actually going back to the quote unquote office a little bit more because I'm working 100%. But that's my own experience. I'm sure everyone's mileage may vary.
So Christian, if I was your boss, how would I measure your productivity? How would I know that you're being productive?
Well, if I were, if you were my boss, you would have a statement of work from me, right? Which says, okay, I have these specific deliverables that are due on certain dates. And that means that my work doesn't really need to be managed day to day. I don't need anybody watching over my shoulder. I have weekly meetings where we discuss progress and also identify and raise any issues that may potentially impact our ability to hit those deadlines. But ultimately, I'm judged by output, which is reflected in a document. In this case, it's a statement of work, which may be different than a normal quote unquote employee, that may not have a statement of work. They may have a job description that has some things, and they may have some items on a task list that they need to perform, which may be assigned by their manager, which needs to be tracked. But for me, it's all output driven. And I actually think, and we've talked about this many times before, that's where management needs to head, is looking at outputs and not so much as activity.
Well, what's interesting, there's a lack of trust still going on, and part of it is driven by new gadgets, uh, like the mouse jiggler. I don't know if you know what that is, but apparently there's a tool that jiggles your mouse so that uh, it looks like you're online, even if you're not. You're walking your dog, and people think, well, Spencer's at his computer because I see his mouse moving. But the tools like that send to signals. Aha! See, they're looking for ways to scam us, to avoid work. Yet I think that's old thinking, because what if I am walking my dog and I get the job done? It's the old mentality of our generation was we sit in an office from 8 to 5, and that's when we compress all of our work. The problem is life happens all throughout that 8 to 5 time period. And if I am somebody who is focused on productivity and getting things done, I can actually match my schedule to my productive times and produce that not in an 8 to 5 schedule, but maybe I'm doing stuff throughout the day, and I'm getting that done. So we need to get away from the looking at just activities. Now, there is something to be said for in-person innovation. You've got to do some of that together, collaboration, meetings where we meet face to face. I just came back from working with a major software developer, and they have offices all over the world in every continent. In the United States, they have about 10 offices, and this is a major software development team and organization. And I worked with a specific team that is their client success team, and there are about 60 to 70 of those. And for the first time since COVID, in 2.5 years, last Friday was the first time they've all gotten together. So it's been, and they have an enormous campus. I mean, you go there, the multiple buildings, and they've got gyms and racquetball, and it's like going to Google campus. I mean, it's amazing. And the parking lot is on this day was maybe half full because they're normally not there. The offices are fairly empty. They're all working remote, and they are killing it. They're getting stuff done. Now, there are clients, construction clients, that you just got to be you got to be on site. You can't do some jobs remotely. But I am seeing that there could be high productivity. We've got to adjust how we manage. And but I was still curious about this because I'm still confused about who wants to go back to the office and who wants to work. So I was giving a keynote in Oregon, and I actually, the night before, I put in a question. If you're listening live, I would love for you to take a poll with us and get out your phone, because I'm gonna, if you're watching this on LinkedIn or on Twitter or on YouTube, I'd love for you to take out your phone and take a picture. We're gonna do a live poll, and so let me switch that here. Let me go solo, and if you can see that. And if you can't do that, make a comment in the on LinkedIn. Make a comment, ask your questions, share how you feel about working remote or in the office. But I ask a question, and you'll see it in a second. But this is the QR code that takes you to the online poll. You can just do that with your phone. It doesn't collect any information other than your response. And I'm going to switch so you can see what the questions look like. So the question is, what is your preference for work in the office versus remote? And I give you 5 choices. The choice is, number 1, 100% working in the office. Choice number 2, 75% in the office and 25% remote. Choice number 3, 50% in the office, 50% remote. Choice number 4, 75% in the office and 25% remote. And choice 5, 100% remote. So, Christian, so far we've got one answer here, and it's 75% office and 25% remote. So this keynote had quite a few registrants. What do you think? If you were to guess, what do you think the breakdown would be? And these are project managers, so let's call them mid to senior level managers.
I would say it's hybrid, maybe 50-50.
Interesting. Okay, and I'd love to hear what our listeners hear. But this is the response: 100% office, 3%. 3% of the participants said they only wanted to work in the office. 75% office and 25% remote, 9% of people. 50-50, that's the one you think would be the biggest? 9%.
Wow. I missed that one.
Me too. Yeah, me too. Remote 75, office 25, 37%. The number one answer, remote 100%, was 43%. 43% saying, just let me work remote. And the challenge that we're having, as I said, is the pressure for employers right now the move was, let's get everybody back in the office by Labor Day. And I think some of those employers are backing that off a little bit. But what I am seeing is that maybe 2 days a week, um, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, you're in the office, or I don't know, but Monday and Friday you're at home. You have that freedom, you have that flexibility. We've just got to figure out how to change the mindset that we focus on, as you said, productivity. That we focus on how do we create those opportunities for development and mentoring, because we do need that face-to-face time to be able to coach and help and develop. Doing that remotely is a lot harder, although I do 100% of my coaching like this on camera, so it can be done. It just takes a very intentional time. Having that remote time is nice for our employees, but it's really important that we get together occasionally. So be so smart about it. And when you have people in the office, make sure that you're planning. These are my suggestions, that you are planning time to use their time wisely. So here's a couple of suggestions I've come up with, Christian, to really make that in office time valuable. Foster team connection. Provide opportunities for teammates to engage and share and discuss work and topics unrelated to the workplace. Why? Because we want them to feel connected. The reason they're coming in the office is to build relationships, that they can trust each other and reach out when they have problems and challenges. And sometimes that's hard to do when you're just focused on problems all the time. You need to be able to we need to know about each other, right? How can I care about you if I don't know what's going on in your life? So sometimes we need to have activities that talk about something other than work. And then the goal for some meetings or connects can be interaction related versus just production related. Well, again, some people say, well, what's the point of that? We need to be counting widgets. Yes, but we also need the people that are counting those widgets to know they have a purpose, that they have an impact, that they are cared for and cared about. Uh, if you're working remotely, be very careful about forgetting about your people. It's easy to do. I mean, I have a team member in the Philippines, and I have to be very intentional about reaching out, because it's easy to just let them do their thing. But your employees need you focused time. They need one-on-one time with you. Schedule that. Don't take it for granted that they're just being productive. Even your best employees, if you're not getting face time with them, the chances of them looking for another opportunity go way up. Connect with them. Spend time with them. Have walking meetings when you're in the office. If you're too busy, just do check-ins and on in-person days, and then you can have open slots on your schedule for the quote unquote office hours, right? So that you can have those drop-in conversations, and then encourage team members to communicate with each other about their hybrid schedules, so that they can you can coordinate and be as efficient and effective when everyone's in the office. Find a day or two when the majority of people's schedules overlap, and encourage others to prioritize that on-site work for that day. So if you need to do some things that require collaboration and input, I mean, that was the whole idea of the Google lunchroom, right? Was to get cross-departmental conversations going. We need that in our work, and so you need to plan and schedule for that. And be intentional about having lunch together, or having coffee when people are in the office, and do that virtually. I have a client, Christian, that is really good about that. Their team's all over the world, but when they have lunch, they'll send a pizza or a sandwich to their team members so they can have lunch with them. Even though they're in different time zones, they're eating together on camera. But those are some things that I think are helpful in managing your in-person versus remote. Thoughts, comments?
Uh, I do have a thought, or maybe a couple. Number one, if people genuinely enjoy working remotely more than in person, then the in-person work should really be reserved for this kind of collaboration this integration, this working together, spending time together. Because if you're just going to have people come into the office and they just go sit in their individual cubicles, what's the point? So I think, as you mentioned, you got to be very intentional. It's going to require some planning and organization on the part of the leadership to make sure that the time together is used wisely, that we don't just go there and do the same things that we were doing remotely. Because then you're just going to be angry that you're there, because you'll be thinking to yourself, I could have done this at home. Why did I have to go get in my car and sit in traffic for 40 minutes to come here and do the stuff that I could have done at home? So I think uh, we've got to be smart, or smarter, about how we work together when we are together, and how we play together when we are together. All part, as you mentioned, of establishing that culture. Hey, Spencer, you're muted.
That hasn't that's never fun to hear, and that's a statement that we all like. Oh, you're on mute. I'm trying to keep the sound nice. Anyway, we get to ensure the policies that our company has and practices really demonstrate the fact that our organization values productive relationships and friendships in the workplace. Because when we have someone, I mean, Christian, I mean, I always look forward to these times that I have with you. I'm going to consider you a friend, and I look for opportunities to promote your business, and because of the trust that I have for you. When we trust people, we reach out to them and say, hey, I mean, I just got 2 referrals this week from a friend and client of mine. That's what friendships and relationships can do for us, and and the same is true in the workplace. When we have problems or challenges to solve, who do we go to? If we're going to someone outside the organization, that's okay, but wouldn't it be great if we have people inside the organization that we can turn to as well for those helps, for those conversations that help us to move forward. Anyway, I think this is something it's worth spending a little extra time that we had, and we need to be intentional about the time that we spend in the office. We need to be, I think, a couple of takeaways from today. Be intentional about the time you have in the office, and so that means more planning and not just it, haphazardly saying you're going to be in the office 2 days a week. Schedule certain activities, as you said, that can only be done in the office. Schedule social events when we're all together. Make use of that time, the highest use of that time, and then measure productivity versus activity. What else did you hear from today? It's
Well, that's the big message, and what what I heard was, for me, the surprising results of your survey,
it's not
which
just the
is,
younger generation that wants to work remotely. It's
yeah,
everybody.
yeah, and really that comes down to, what are we looking for out of work,
Yeah.
and we were having a conversation. I don't know if it was with you or with somebody else, a few weeks ago, about what are we looking for, and the number one thing now is this freedom, this ability to kind of do what we need to do when we need to do it, and do what we want when we want to do it. The number two thing was the opportunity for mastery. So, being able to learn and develop, uh, in my career, the knowledge and the expertise that I feel that I need, so that I can actually feel like I'm making a difference. And then, compensation was down that list. And so, uh, this freedom, this idea of freedom, having a little bit of control over your own life, is very important. I think it's manifested in the statistics, manifested in the results of the survey that you conducted with your client.
Yeah. Well, I agree. Well, so for me, that's it. And if you're listening to this with with a team, just be very, very smart about how you are engaging, and if you're being too belligerent about being back in the office, it'll probably have a consequence that you're not going to love.
Spencer, I really appreciate you bringing this to our attention once more. And you do so much great work with your clients, and they're very, very fortunate to have you assisting them through these challenging times. But if those who are listening, if they are interested in learning more about how you might be able to help them uh, to develop high performing teams in their organization, or develop as leaders themselves, what's the best way for them to reach out and connect with you?
You know what? Thank you. I get a lot of people reaching out to me on LinkedIn. I love that. Just Spencer Horn, uh, Altium Leadership. You can see I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, or go to our website. I had this client yesterday scope me out on the website. He's like, it's all about fixing his broken team. So that really stood out to him, as that's a big part of what we do, and we help fix team performance. And this is a team performance issue, and that's one of the reasons why we really need to get it right, for our team's sakes, and our organization's sakes. And I want my biggest thing is I want people's lives to be a little bit easier. The problems are not going to get smaller. The problem is that I see is we make our problems bigger and more challenging because we don't address them well, we don't deal with them well. But if we have the tools to address the challenges, then the problems that are so big are manageable. And so reach out to me on altiumleadership.com. And Christian, I know storytelling has such a huge impact, and I'm so excited for the work that you're doing all over the world. You're joining me. We're going to be going to Lebanon and Cyprus very, very soon, and share with them the story of storytelling. How can people reach you?
Thank you, Spencer. Likewise, you can reach me on LinkedIn. Just look up Christian Napier on LinkedIn, or you can visit our website, raconto.io. It's rakonto.io, or you can email me, christian@raconto.io. Spencer, it's great to see you. It's a wonderful way to end the month of September, and I look forward to connecting with you and our guests soon. Listeners, please like and subscribe to our podcast, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.